One of the things was the reflecting pool. Hasn't worked since 1922 because it always leaked. It always leaked from 1922. You know, it's the largest, longest pool ever and all that. The concept is beautiful, but it always leaked because of the size, because of maintenance, whatever. Now, we have photographs or tapes, like moving cameras, right? We have them where people are on the side cutting it with a box knife.
Hi again, everybody. It's a guy who doesn't read a PDB, but has a really intimate knowledge of the history of the reflecting pool, including things that are totally made up. It's 5 o'clock in the East. Donald Trump's nonsensical and still very dangerous response and utterances to his reflecting pool vandalism lies have been undermined by his own Justice Department. And it is not a story to be ignored as insignificant. His outright refusal to be persuaded by facts and evidence and admit that anything Trump did was wrong, or in this case, what the pool contractor he hired in a no-bid contract had done, is symptomatic of a larger, more grave issue. Our friend Tom Nichols writes in The Atlantic this, quote, "It is a warning that the president has encased himself in the hard amber of irrationality that inevitably surrounds authoritarian leaders. He has become detached from reality, and that detachment is extremely dangerous." On Friday, a remarkable rebuke of Trump's repeated lies about vandalism came in the form of a filing released by Trump ally and now U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro. Pirro said the pool's holes were due to a botched job by the contractor, not vandalism. But since her findings went against what Trump wanted to hear, the former Fox News host soon found herself having to appear before Trump directly. On Monday evening, she went to the White House, box of evidence in hand, defending herself and going after Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, who had supported Trump's vandalism claims. The New York Times reports this, quote, "During the meeting Monday, Ms. Pirro, her voice raised at times, directly confronted Mr. Burgum, accusing him of misleading the president. She made the case that Burgum had promoted a self-serving cover story to conceal his own missteps. An Oval Office battle royale over holes in the pool liner may seem, frankly, stupid and insignificant at a time when our country is dealing with a war and an economic calamity. But the ordeal is no joke. People's lives were seriously impacted by the lies told by Trump. The felony charge against former Olympian David Hearn held a potential 10-year prison sentence. Charges against him were dropped, as were the misdemeanor charges for 3 other individuals. One of those 3, Sophie Dennison-Gibby, spoke to the Washington Post and said this, quote, "Dennison-Gibby said Trump's comments against her and others accused of damaging the reflecting pool, including threatening jail time, made her feel sick. To be called out by the most powerful person in the world, the President of the United States, and called a sick, violent vandal when all I had done was pick up a piece of trash was awful," she said. The abuse of power on display here gets us back to that warning from Tom Nichols. More from his piece, quote, "Trump has now passed from being a stubborn narcissist to a cocooned authoritarian. Political scientists since World War II have studied the problem of irrational leaders, people in positions of power who seem unable to accept any version of reality that conflicts with their assumptions. Irrational in this sense does not mean stupid or incompetent or psychotic. It refers more specifically to leaders who have become so trapped by their own self-regard, so isolated from the outside world, so imprisoned within their own sense of infallibility that they refuse to consider any arguments or information that conflicts with their beliefs. Donald Trump transforming into a cocooned authoritarian is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard's here. Also joining us, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, now the co-host of Pod Save the World. Contributor Ben Rhodes is here. And staff writer at The Atlantic, author of the piece we just read from, Tom Nichols, is here. He's a professor emeritus of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College. Ben Rhodes, I thought of the show trials in Russia that we've covered, the manufacturing of evidence of drug paraphernalia, the showcasing of Americans in glass boxes, and the knowledge that we all knew the criminality was manufactured. Trump knew that we knew the criminality was manufactured. but Americans were used as pawns for larger geopolitical trading, I guess, for lack of a better word. Do you think that America looks like that around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this before with you, Nicole, but we have a tendency to sane wash Trump. I mean, maybe not on this show, but here in the United States, we have to put him on some recognizable continuum of a Republican-Democrat fight, or, a leader who's channeling the grievances of a set of people, which he is, and therefore not see just clearly how completely upside down things are, and how much he is, as Tom writes eloquently in his piece, he's very much an autocrat who's completely out of touch with reality and has to construct his own reality. That's clear as day to people around the world, many of whom have lived under such leaders or have in their history such leaders. And I think a point I want to make that you emphasize there, Nicole, is Tom captures the extent to which in those passages Trump has to manufacture reality. That, if he says that the pool was vandalized, someone must be, prosecuted for that. But let's just not forget the fact that there are individual human beings that suffer, sometimes greatly, because Trump has to insist on a certain reality. So in this case, we just heard someone who had to have their life flash before their eyes, that they might be prosecuted and put in prison as a violent felon simply because they picked up a piece of trash. And even if they weren't prosecuted, I'm sure, in addition to the strain of going through that ordeal, who knows what impact it had on their lives and their relationships. But let's widen the lens on this, right? If you are a farmer whose livelihood is destroyed by tariffs because Donald Trump is insisting that tariffs work, he doesn't care. If you are an Iranian schoolgirl going to school in Manab, a bomb is going to get dropped on you because Donald Trump has convinced himself that it's going to be easy to remove the Iranian government. That's the reality that he insists was true when he went to war in Iran. And we can go on down the list. There are real human beings on the other end of his insistence on a reality that is not real. And it is enabled by people like Doug Burgum, you mentioned. Doug Burgum is supposed to be a serious person, right? He was a business leader. He was a kind of more, traditional conservative Republican. But because he needs to stay in the good graces of Trump, he has to go along with the idea that, people vandalize the reflecting pool instead of it just being an incompetent project run by a no-bid contractor who is a crony of Trump's. Now, that, too, is something we see in authoritarian systems, that the autocratic leader is surrounded by a cohort who will go along with saying that black is white, that up is down, that what is not true is true, because they want to stay in the good graces of the leader. That is something that we've seen time and again with authoritarians. Putin in Russia right now is only surrounded by sycophants who tell him everything he wants to hear, because if they don't, they might get pushed off a balcony or they're going to have to self-exile to some other country. And so we do have the ingredients here of like an authoritarian system with a strongman leader. But we also have very real human consequences to these decisions, whether it's the reflecting pool or any of these other things that Trump is insisting are true that are not.
Von Hilliard, what was in the white box?
The fact that Jeanine Pirro was bringing what she said was her own effective evidence to make her case in her own defense in the form of a white box, I think, is telling in itself, because she understood the severity of Donald Trump's threats and ire with her. And when you're looking, I think, Nicole, at the fact that even Jeanine Pirro, somebody who has propagated a great many of his conspiracy theories in the past, even a Fox producer in the defamation lawsuit from Dominion Voting and Smartmatic in records that were produced as evidence, a Fox producer said that she was somebody that parroted conspiracy theories. So the fact is that she's being targeted is, I think, a very clear indication of just how few people inside of this specific White House do tell the president that, in fact, he is wrong. Because to Ben's point here, if you go back to the first term, we were covering palace intrigue stories, tension, his frustration with chiefs of staff. That doesn't exist at the same level like it did during the first administration, for the same reason why there was little internal drama in his 2024 presidential campaign. I reported in 2023 why people appreciated Susie Wiles as the effective campaign manager. It's because she didn't try to block access to Donald Trump. And I think that one of those moments that sticks out to me was back in 2023, days before he was charged on felony counts for, related to the Stormy Daniels hush money payments. I rode on his plane, the campaign plane, back from a rally from Texas. And at that particular rally, he had his hand on his heart as video of the January 6th attack played during the national anthem. And when he got back onto that plane, the campaign brass, they cheered him on. I remember one staffer holding up the thumbs up saying, "Great job, boss." And it was at that moment that I realized that there was no tension inside of that campaign, much like we see at the White House today, because everybody that worked for him then, as they do now, understood what their responsibility was. And in so many ways, you saw the president respond to Jeanine Pirro this way, because frankly, there is little evidence to suggest that anybody at the top echelons of this White House explicitly tell the president when he is in fact wrong, and that his conspiracy theories are allowed to be given breath to believing them as true fact.